everyone, and thank you, the stalwarts who are here early on the Monday morning. Thank you, we appreciate that. So, this is going to look, this session now is going to look at external affairs issues, in particular, and advocacy. And it's my great pleasure to welcome our new SVP for External Affairs, Thomas Reynaert, who, this is his first AGM in IATA colours, but many of you will know him because he's been involved in the industry in the past. And we're going to have a short presentation on some of the key issues globally facing the industry, and then of course we'll take your questions. So thank you very much. Over to you, Thomas.
Thank you very much, Chris, and welcome to all of you being so kind to show up for this early media briefing. Indeed, it's my first AGM as an IATA staffer, and it's been a great experience. So my role is to run government affairs or advocacy for IATA worldwide, and so this presentation is going to obviously be connected with policy and regulation. So today I'm going to be talking about connectivity and the way, or what policymakers should do to support us to get back to proper connectivity. Now, we know that passenger numbers, luckily enough, have grown, and that we've grown back to the numbers before COVID, and even over that in terms of passenger numbers, and growth going forward looks very promising in terms of passenger numbers and cargo. What I think most people amongst us, and certainly governments, I think, is that we have a trend of risking connectivity, and we actually have lost connectivity in the last 8 to 10 years or so. Connectivity worldwide has actually gone down, while passenger numbers and cargo has gone up. So what's going on? I mean, there are a number of, it's very complex, as you know, the way we are organized. There are, of course, supply chain issues, which could partially explain why connectivity has gone down. Less aircraft, we need more aircraft, etc. But my presentation is actually going to show that there are a number of other issues, regulatory issues, regulatory burden, that actually add to the cost and the complexity, and which are certainly not helping to restoring connectivity. The biggest problem in this connectivity is what we call the thin routes, and I think Europe, unfortunately, here is a good example of the loss of connectivity on those routes. During the period we have looked at, that's our study between 2019 and 2025, Europe is the biggest loser, and next of course to the Middle East, which is explainable what's been going on recently, but 62% of the routes that were lost in Europe. So let's take a look at what this means in terms of regulation policy. The link to that is, we would certainly argue that this is, in a difficult time, certainly, that we are experiencing today, is that governments certainly have a role to help us support us to get back to that connectivity and get connectivity back and connectivity growth back. First of all is, I think we're looking at two things. On the one hand, we need to reduce excessive regulation. I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the fiscal burden. You're all very familiar with the taxation and the role that plays in the cost of air transport. And we need to fix capacity constraints and maybe the data rules. So the complexity of the data rules and exchange of data, transfer of data, that's something maybe not all of you are familiar with, but certainly also adds a lot to the complexity and has an impact on the connectivity going forward. Now let's start with looking at two regions, just to pick two regions, which we know very well. One is Europe, EU 261, the passenger rights regulation, which is currently under review, and which has been mentioned several times, I think also yesterday. Let me go a little bit more into detail on that. At the moment, we see that the proposal that's on the table and the three EU institutions are discussing is a really risky proposal. It's a very bad proposal. And I think EU is going to make the mistake if it goes through with the proposals, the amendments proposed by the European Parliament. The discussion is actually, where the discussion really should be on what does the passenger want. And this means that apparently governments are not really listening to what the passenger really wants. The discussion is more about compensation, rather than actually fixing the problems, why we're having delays, why we're having to cancel flights. So passengers, if you know the passengers, and we know very well, we do regular polls with our passengers. Passengers, first of all, want choice. And today, certainly also in Europe, in other parts of the world, we have great choice, thanks to deregulation and competition. Secondly, passengers really want to get to their destination. They don't want their flights being cancelled, right? Even if there is some delay, they still want to get to the destination. So being able to reroute passengers on time is important. And also passengers, certainly in times of disruption, want to be properly informed. So want to have the relevant information, the right information, and the right time. Now what happened, just to go back a little bit on EU 261, is when the European Commission proposed its new proposal to revise the EU 26, it was actually based on facts and figures. It was based on a proper impact assessment, which IATA we very much supported. And the European Commission changed the old threshold of 3 hours before 3 hours delay before compensation hits to 5 hours. So this is really workable within 5 hours for domestic flights. From an operation perspective, to get the crew in, to get a new aircraft. So 5 hours is really was a very good start as a threshold. The Council then later on amended that proposal and put it back to 4 hours. Now 4 hours from an IATA perspective, and our partner said, well, 4 hours is probably doable, it's not great, we can make that work. And of course the complete disaster came in December last year when the European Parliament came with its Christmas wish list and put it back to 3 hours. So actually what's on the table today in terms of discussion within conciliation procedure is that they're talking about the 3 hour threshold, and the European Parliament is not going to budge on this 3 hour threshold, which gives us the biggest problem. So the 3 hour threshold for us and our regional association partners is really the red line for us. So there's no progress. There has been no progress. On the contrary, it's actually worse because the European Parliament, on top of the 3 hour threshold, put a whole list of additional requirements with regards to compensation, second free bag, etc. So actually for us at the moment, as far as EU 261 is concerned, we've been very clear recently is we rather have no deal than a bad deal, right? So in a way, we hope that the negotiations, if the 3 hour threshold stays in there, actually fail. And well, then we're back to square one, but the current EU 261 regulation is better than the proposal that's on the table. Latin America. And by the way, you see the numbers, if the current proposal goes through, we would actually, in terms of compensation, the compensation cost would double from 8 billion to roughly 15 billion euros a year. Right? So that's really shocking. Now, Latin America, again, not an easy region. I think it was also clear from Peter's press briefing yesterday. We have a lot of regulatory proposals, of which most are really negative proposals. If I go to the countries in particular, Colombia is talking about fare caps, really governments interfering with our commercial business, the way how to do business. So governments seem to know better how to run an airline than we do, which is quite astonishing. In Chile and Brazil, there are discussions about free bags, again, ancillary options and how to organize your tickets. That should be a commercial decision, not from the government. And in Peru, there's discussions on free seat allocations, so mandatory free seat allocations, as well as free ticket transferability. So you see there a trend that we see a little bit in Europe as well, in EU 261, a trend in Latin America very much, which I would call a populistic trends of governments. So typically it's really short before elections, there's lots of elections coming on. So governments want to look good, and they really propose populistic measures and interfering with commercial decisions. Second one, I talked about fiscal burden taxation. Yes, I know you're very familiar with it, but I wanted to put the numbers on the slide again. More than 60 billion, so aviation is paying more than $60 billion a year in terms of aviation taxes. Now, you've heard the numbers of Willy. Growth is slowing down slightly, but also the net profitability of the airlines is going to be halved. That's a forecast for 2016, year over year. And in the middle of these times, you still see that governments continue to go through with new taxes. The number of $60 billion a year is really completely astonishing. Now, that's the governments doing their thing. Now, if you were asking the passengers, and we've used independent polling from Savanta recently, which you see there on the slides, is actually most, if not most, 81% of the passengers say that aviation is being taxed. There's too many taxes on flying. So passengers are aware when that they actually are paying taxes, and the consciousness of the passengers that taxes are actually increasing, also that consciousness is going up. So more and more passengers do not agree, a huge majority do not agree with taxes being increased on aviation. Now, there are some good examples. In Europe, one is Sweden. If I come from Belgium, and I think we're pretty heavily taxed, and I think the Belgians, Luc, amongst you, you know what I'm talking about, but Sweden is even probably the king or the number one in terms of taxation in Europe. Now, Sweden has decided to abolish its passenger tax last year. And why is that? Not because Sweden doesn't like taxes, because they realized that the passenger tax was really going to hit on connectivity, that people were going to look at alternatives, and it was really going to be bad for the Swedish economy. So I think that's a striking and a very good example. Another positive sign is in Germany, where last year the Merz government has decided, I think it was November last year, to effect as of next month to roll back the ticket tax. So again, Germany and the Merz government being very concerned about growth, they clearly see the impact of taxes, the impact on the economy. In the Netherlands, bad example then again, in Belgium, but let me just stick to the Netherlands. The Dutch government plans to increase the aviation tax next year, according to the current proposal. It's going to be the highest passenger tax in the EU. So good luck with that, I would say, in the Netherlands. We know that from past experience, and the expectation is that now 3/4 of the passengers are planning to take the flight not in the Netherlands anymore. People are very price sensitive. So they fly from Düsseldorf, Cologne, even from Brussels. So it's easy to take the car from the Netherlands and to cross the border and to fly from it, as long as it's not in the Netherlands. But this is all known, and the Dutch government seems to completely ignore it. Brazil, it's not only about Europe, but also Brazil has a proposal now to put a tax of 26.5% VAT on tickets. 26.5%. Even in Belgium, we don't have that high VAT rate on goods. The expectation is that the demand in Brazil will actually decrease by 30%. So the numbers are known, and still governments continue to go ahead with it. France increased its tax, a solidarity tax, what they call a solidarity tax. It's a blunt tax. The numbers, actually according to a report that the French Minister of Transport issued, and the report says clearly that the market share for the French carriers because of that tax will decrease. Instead of stopping that initiative, the French government actually promoted the solidarity tax and the levy outside of France towards developing economies. They call it a premium tax, which will be disastrous for these countries in Latin America, in Africa, and so forth. But so that's quite negative, I'm afraid, and worst of all, there's of course the risk of the double taxation, which we see going on at the level of the UN. As you know, the ICAO guidance in terms of aviation tax is quite clear. Airlines should be taxed on the basis of their home country, where they're headquartered typically, to avoid double taxation. Now, there's really bad coordination at the UN level. That happens more often, but in this case, it's also the case for taxation. The UN Tax Committee and the UN Framework Convention on Tax really, apparently not talking to the ICAO, really want the airlines also to be taxed in the places where they're doing business. So we're seeing a risk of double taxation, which is completely unacceptable. The IATA is working hard, by the way, so the next couple of months are going to be crucial for us to convince the non-ICAO folks in the UN to change course. That's taxes, and of course capacity constraints. The classic capacity constraints we see at the level of airports, then of course related to that, what we think about slots harmonization, and last but not least, also one of my favorite topics is air traffic management, or the lack of it. Now with airports, we know that according to our estimates, is by 2050, passenger amount will basically double. What does this mean? More passengers flying, hopefully more aircraft flying as well. And it means that the constraints we see at airports, for instance, also in Europe, but also some of the other regions, is going to be a serious issue. It is already, but it's going to get worse. Now, some governments bluntly say, on top of that is, well, we're going to, because of noise issues, for instance, we're going to cap, like in Schiphol, the Netherlands, we're going to cap the flights by the number of, I think it's 478,000 a year. We see, because of increasing the amount also in Schiphol, I mean, Schiphol is an important airport, we can't ignore it, that the number of passengers, a number of flights is actually getting close to 500,000 and more, possibly going forward. Now, and the only argument then the Dutch government has, well, we've got the noise issue, we need to cap the flights. So it's actually completely wrong reaction. We need to go back to the balanced approach. For instance, the Belgian government, at least with regards to noise, has understood they need to go to check the rules of the balanced approach, which you know very well, I think, and which is globally accepted, which is also part of European regulation. The other point is, of course, the slots harmonization. We see traffic growth, right? Our conviction is that we need to stick to the World Airport Slots Guidelines. They work, they're transparent, it's the most honest manner to allocate slots to airlines, and also to allow new entrants. That's going to be important to hold the line for us, as traffic, of course, is increasing, especially at L3 level, L3 airports. And then last but not least, air traffic management. I have to take the example of Europe, but I could also talk about the US, which the US is making progress, right? In terms of the FAA has very good intentions and great plans with additional funding to make the FAA more efficient, digitization programs and so forth. Now in Europe, unfortunately, the picture is still very scattered. AGM, or better management of air traffic in Europe, continues a political discussion. We have known, and also my days at A4E, that the technology is there, is ready to manage, think of virtual towers, but many more solutions are available to manage increasing traffic in a very efficient, in a cost-efficient way, by the way, but we still see problems in Europe in terms of understaffing. For me, these are excuses of actually bad management. You know, it's all badly managed, and I don't see a short-term solution there. So as IATA, we continue to push for a cost-efficient airspace, and I would say going forward, and the depoliticization of the topic. The ANSPs are clearly here a bottleneck, right? Continues to be a bottleneck when we're talking about constraints. Next. Yeah. Well, this is maybe a topic where you may be less familiar with, but it is the fact of the fragmented privacy rules that we have worldwide is indeed behind the scenes, because it's not something that is visible, that is really hindering IATA promoting facilitation of traffic. So we do everything we can to work with governments, to work with all stakeholders in the supply chain to facilitate cross-border air, passenger and cargo. But what's the use if we have actually conflicting and I would say a huge, very complex pattern of national privacy rules that actually cause a lot of problems in terms of compliance, but also operational issues. Now, just to be clear, privacy rules are a good thing, and we shouldn't get rid of those rules. That's not the point. But the point is that we should recognize, governments should recognize amongst themselves that these are applicable not only to all industries but also to aviation. And of course, our business is we're crossing borders all the time, constantly, and we need to apply these privacy rules. Just I think we haven't put the number on there, but on one journey you can have up to 160 different privacy rules applicable to that flight, to the traffic on that flight. The solution here is not to get rid of these privacy regulations, obviously, because we need them for security, we need them for anti-terrorism plans and implementation, but a better consistency amongst them, a better coordination. If you think, for instance, about the international data transfers between the EU and third countries, it's really a mess. So to be very clear on that, ICAO, luckily enough, and we've been working very closely and hard with ICAO, with its legal committee, to educate governments about this issue, the complexity, but also ICAO intends to issue guidance to governments and about the problem. So a better coordination and understanding of the differences, so that we can get to somehow a better recognition of the national privacy rules. That would help us a lot. We would argue that also in this case, regulatory fragmentation adds more burden to good air connectivity. So we'll work with ICAO on that in the next couple of months, actually, as we speak, and we hope to get some good results there. That brings me to, I think, the last slide, just saying that, of course, connectivity matters. I think that's a no-brainer. We see, and we will see, where there's less connectivity will have negative impact on the economies, on the local economies worldwide. A failure to recover the routes since 2019 peak, if that's the case, or the risk, should really worry governments, not only just airlines, but also governments, because it will negatively impact their economies. I talked about the big, we had a selection of, I think I gave you some examples where we'll be focusing on to talk to governments that they should really help us on those points I just mentioned, the regulatory, the fiscal, the constraints issues, and so forth. We should really get connectivity going, and they should really realize it's going to hit their economies. Now, the study that IATA did here, as I'm not inventing this, you see, and you can contact Chris to get the link to the study. IATA has developed for a number of countries, 120 countries, I think. We have one-pagers which clearly explain the evolution, actually the decrease of connectivity in the particular countries. Now again, the majority of the loss of connectivity there is on the thin routes. I think it's close to 90% of the connectivity is actually on the thin routes. Again, this is a huge problem for the remote areas, and we'll continue to push those data, the proof and the expertise we have in this field to governments, and ask them really for our justification, their justification for additional regulation at this point, given these numbers. And I think that's where I would like to end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas. So, hopefully that was an interesting run through of some of the challenges we're facing, and particularly that connectivity data, the route data, I think tells us a very interesting story. So, do we have any questions for Thomas? Let's start with the gentleman in the front here. A microphone's coming your way. If you could just state your name and where you're from, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Hi there, it's Lindsay Shooters from Daily Maverick in South Africa. So on a couple of the slides you said that there is no public support for IATA, but in South Africa the air traffic, jet fuel provisioning, all of those things are on the public account. But you are calling for tax cuts. Is that the same for all regions, including like Africa and South Africa, where the government is actually supporting air traffic, or at least air transport?
Sorry, I didn't get the last part of it.
When you say you're advocating for tax cuts, does that include a region like South Africa where the government does support a lot of it?
Yes, of course, because it adds to the cost, and again, if you think it plays a major part in connectivity. If you see the impact also of the fuel price, the cost of flying, you've seen recently that many flights have been cancelled, and it also affecting routes at the end of the day. So taxation is a major factor. Of course, it depends on the level of taxation. If you add all the costs that I'm just mentioning here, it's not only taxation. If you add all that, we would argue that it will have an impact on connectivity. At the end of the day, airlines are businesses. We need to make commercial decisions, and therefore government should realize, because we run these airlines, want to run in an efficient way, we want to make a profit, but we also want to connect people, right? So you can't have, I do think that taxation is, well, I understand why taxation is there. Governments who have a deficit issue, it's the easy way to do, and it happens all over the world. But mid to long term, governments need to realize it will have a negative impact, certainly if they keep on increasing those taxes.
Just to clarify, I mean, obviously, what we're really looking at here is extra taxes on top of what's the standard thing. Obviously, we're not saying aviation shouldn't pay its way with usual corporation taxes and so on. It's these extra passenger taxes and charges and things which layer on top of that that's the problem. Okay, another question, please.
Luc.
Luc, thanks.
Luc with Business here in Belgium. I have a question about the aviation taxes. Are there any countries known to IATA where the revenue from aviation taxes is used directly, for example, to the production of purchase of sustainable fuel or other measures?
Not that I'm aware of. And that's been our major criticism, that the taxes or levies, I think maybe one, it's not a tax, it's a levy, the SAF levy in Singapore, that's going to actually be reinvested in the production of SAF, but we're not really talking about that, we're really talking about blunt taxes, and I'm not aware of any passenger tax, ticket tax that's actually reinvested in the sector. Thank you.
Jens Flottau, Aviation Week. Morning.
Hi, Jens.
Hi. Willie mentioned in his speech yesterday that the Brussels office of IATA will be strengthened, and I wonder what that means. What's the strengthening about?
Thank you, Jens. Well, what it means is we have hired a number of people. We've hired 3 more people to strengthen the Brussels office. So we had a very good Brussels office, but given the challenges that Brussels continues to put on us, we decided to strengthen that. That's actually one of my priorities, to make sure that we have a stronger voice in Brussels. We do work together with the likes of Airlines for Europe, ERA, and the other stakeholders, but IATA needs to have a stronger voice, because we represent the global picture. We represent the majority of the airlines, and so our voice needs to be better heard. So that's what we mean by strengthening.
Good morning, gentlemen. And I'm Tai Zhang from the Wealth Magazine, Taiwan. Okay, and you raised a couple of examples in Europe and Latin America as to the government attitude. And how about Asia Pacific? And we also noticed that there are some ambitious mega airport construction plan in proceeding now. For example, in the Philippines, Singapore, South Korea. Will it improve the connectivity in the foreseeable future? Thank you.
Yeah. So Asia, again, compared to Europe, you're in a great spot, a great situation. I think there's good growth, and Asia, and to some extent Latin America, they've gotten the message that you need airports to connect people. So it's a positive development. We're watching it very closely, and we're working very closely with the local authorities to do everything we can to support the development. So I think Asia is in a good place, well positioned for growth in terms of airports being developed.
Yes.
Hi, good morning. Brent Fidel from Guardian Media, which is in Trinidad, the Caribbean region. The Caribbean region has difficult, a little bit difficult space to operate in, and it has constantly been criticized. Also, Peterson has talked about it multiple times, of governments charging too much in taxes, but we're heavily dependent on interconnectivity, regional connectivity. Have you seen any kind of movement towards a workable solution where everyone can benefit?
Well, taxation is certainly not the answer. I think having a local regulatory framework that promotes, that enables aviation to do what it needs to do, and according to market conditions, is always the best solution. So that would be my advice. I think in the case of islands, I would say that the challenge for connectivity is even higher. You don't have any other alternatives to get to places. From my experience in Europe, I can see that we have most of our support around these numbers, and most of the, I would say, concerns from governments from countries and island countries or remote areas. So I would say they realize they actually have usually very low or no taxes, because they realize they need aviation as a lifeline for their economy and for their people, for the mobility. And so one needs to be tread very, very carefully on if you're talking about taxing the passenger on the ticket. But as Chris said before, we're not talking about corporate taxation is a given. We all need to pay taxes, that's quite clear. But government needs to be very careful before they start really cutting in the flesh of the airline. So a very strong partnership with the government is, of course, we'll continue to work on that. That's, of course, advisable. There's no way around it. So promoting aviation rather than punishing it, that's the answer.
I think maybe also a reference to the global solidarity tax, the fact that there was some interest in that in the Caribbean, and that would be very damaging for their economies.
Correct. It's exactly the one I mentioned, the premium tax that the French government is trying to export. That idea makes absolutely. It's a typical populist political move, wanting to look good towards the people, but actually with a premium tax, is what you do is you scare away business folks traveling to your country. So you need to look at the data. We've got plenty of data on this connectivity and what taxation and all the measures, what that actually could mean to the connectivity, air connectivity of your country, which is again crucial.
Any more questions? Yes, Karen.
Karen Smith, representing Business Day in South Africa. Can you say anything about air traffic control? I mean, there have been some scary incidents.
For that question, I have to refer to my colleague Nick Curry, who happens to be in the room, but he's our expert on that particular matter. Nick, if you don't mind.
We'll have an operational session later today, and you can pose the question then. I'm sure he'd be happy to take it, rather than putting him on the spot right now. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Any more? Yes, in the back. Thank you, Thomas.
Hi, Justin Cook, Breaking Travel News. You talk about the big four major external challenges. What we're seeing with countries like China dramatically liberalizing visa and transit requirements to stimulate demand and connectivity, and the success of that. Is visa policy becoming as important to economic growth, and therefore are we seeing the emergence of, in fact, the big five?
Well, China, you mentioned one country which has great growth, a great future also in aviation, and I think Chinese government really gets what needs to be done to facilitate international traffic, and so that's a positive development insofar they can continue to promote it, and I think other countries could probably learn from that. Now this doesn't do away with the importance of privacy regulation, which have their own good reasons why they exist, but definitely visa facilitation, anything we can do, anything the government can do to facilitate the traffic amongst the cross-border traffic is very much welcome.
Any more for any more? Oh, yes, go again, sir. Go ahead.
Okay. Sorry, I don't know if this falls in your wheelhouse, so if it doesn't, I apologize. Again, in the Caribbean, we've started to implement a lot of immigration forms for entry and exit. When we asked our government in Trinidad, how is our data being protected, they didn't really tell us. They kind of said, yeah, it was safe, and that's it. So as the Caribbean kind of expands with this regional initiative, what kind of data protection should be in place? What should we be considering to protect our data? If it falls in a wheelhouse, if it doesn't, I apologize.
Yeah, I think there's a question also for the lawyers how to shape that. But there are a sufficient number of regimes worldwide in function or trying to function. Depends what you're talking about. The principle in Europe, when you mention entry-exit system, it really doesn't resonate very well because government needs to make sure before they implement entry-exit system, they need to make sure that the infrastructure is ready to cope with it, which ideally in this case should be digital solution. I say ideally, but it needs to be workable. But from a legal side, I can't really comment on that exactly what it should pertain or not. But it is not unusual to see these systems being developed.
Okay, well, I think we're out of questions, so thank you very much indeed for your time.